Hey my dear friends, I hope you're all having a really beautiful day today. In this episode we'll follow Diep as she wakes up in James's tiny house at the foot of the mountain, trying to learn how to walk again. And at the same time, James's mum secretly goes against her husband's orders and comes all the way up to visit the girl who nearly died for their son. Will this quiet visit become the first warm bridge between Diep and James's family, or will it open up a new storm waiting ahead? Stay with me until the end to find out what really happens in that little house under the mountain. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of the next episodes. Morning mist hugged the mountain slope when Diep opened her eyes. A low wooden ceiling, white walls, a tiny cactus on a table, the smell of hot ginger porridge drifting in. This was not the hospital, not the half-built house on the hillside. It was a small, clean room at the foot of the mountain. Her side throbbed. She shifted and winced. The door opened. James came in with a tray, a steaming bowl of porridge and a few pills. He looked thinner, with stubble on his jaw and shadows under his eyes. When he saw her awake, his shoulders dropped. "You're up," he said softly. "How do you feel?" "Where is this?" Diep whispered. "Your house? Why am I here?" "Yeah," he nodded. "My place down there. I asked the doctor to let you stay here. Keeping you in the hospital any longer would have burned through everything." He sat, stirred the porridge and held the spoon out. "Rice porridge with ginger. Eat a little, then take your medicine." She took the spoon but kept watching him. Every time she swallowed, he waited and fed her the next mouthful. For a while, only the clink of the spoon and a bird outside broke the silence. "James," she finally asked, "the hospital bills, the medicine, this house, how are you paying for all of it? DJ must be in trouble now, right?" His hand slowed for a moment, then he forced a small smile. "I used what DJ saved, and some side jobs. Don't think about it. Your job is to get better. I'll handle the rest." "But Diep." His tone was gentle but firm. "I didn't bring you here so you could call yourself a burden. This house is yours too. I rented and fixed it up so you'd have a place to rest when we went to buy crops. We just had to use it earlier than planned. It's still a decent home. You're not dragging me down, okay?" The word burden stung. Diep lowered her eyes to the bowl. When she finished, James helped her sit at the edge of the bed and lowered her feet to the floor. One arm around her waist, the other holding her hand. "The doctor said you have to move a little every day," he reminded her. "If you don't walk, your legs will lock up. We'll just go around the room. I'm right here." Every step set fire along her side. Sweat beaded on her forehead, though the air was cool. At the small step between the bedroom and the outer room, her foot slipped. Her body lurched. James caught her and pulled her back. For a second they staggered, then he let out a short laugh. "See? You almost fell again. Slow down, no one's chasing you." Leaning on his shoulder, Diep panted. "I can't even walk on my own. I really am. Hey." He nudged her lightly. "You fell off a cliff. The fact you're walking at all is already a miracle." Through the doorway she saw the tiny yard and a few rows of green. Lettuce, mustard greens, spring onions. James followed her gaze. "When you're better, you can help me water those," he said. "Then I finally get some free labour. Right now I'm just your full-time nurse." Diep managed a small laugh. For a moment she imagined herself standing there, steady on her feet, watering vegetables beside him. Simple, but far away. In town, in a neat living room, James's mother sat by the tea table staring at her phone. On the screen was a photo James had sent. The tiny room under the mountain. Diep propped up with pillows, leg bandaged, face pale but awake. James behind her, thinner, trying to smile. She zoomed in on Diep's bandage, then on her son's hollow cheeks. A sigh slipped out. "Look at him," she said, turning the phone toward her husband. "He's skin and bones. That girl almost died, and now she's in his little house at the foot of the mountain. How can I not worry?" James's father glanced, took a sip of tea. "If you're that worried, tell him to shut DJ down and come home. He chose this." "I'm not talking about DJ," she replied. "I'm talking about him taking care of a girl who just fell off a cliff. Like it or not, she was his wife. The papers aren't even done. We're his parents. We can't pretend nothing happened. He set the cup down. You're getting soft again. The more we interfere, the harder it'll be for him to cut ties. He moved out to be independent. Let him live with it. Don't chase after him. Oh, you say it like it's easy. Her voice trembled. He's still our son. You pushed him to leave her. He argued with you and moved out. Now he sends this photo and you don't see how bad he looks. James's father walked to the window, staring at the quiet street. Because he's our son, he said slowly. I won't watch him drown with her. DJ was shaky. Had the accident, hospital, that rented house. Money pouring out. If you go see him, you'll just give him one more excuse to cling to this. James's mother gripped the phone. She remembered how plain and shy Diep had seemed the first time, how coldly she had looked away, convinced her son would find someone better. Now that same girl had nearly died, and the one breaking himself to keep her alive was still James. If I don't go and something else happens to her, she said quietly, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I need to see where they're living, how they're managing in that little house. If you walk out that door, don't say I didn't warn you, he replied. Don't drag this family any deeper. The ticking clock filled the silence. She didn't argue. She stood, went into the bedroom and closed the door softly. Late that night, when the house was dark, James's mother opened her wardrobe and took out an old cloth bag. She packed slowly. Milk cartons, soft pastries, a few bottles of vitamins, a new wool scarf she'd never given anyone. She lay down but barely slept. At first light she got dressed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and picked up the bag. When she stepped into the living room, her husband was already there with a steaming cup of tea. Without looking at her, he said, If you go, don't come back complaining to me. She paused half a second, then slipped on her shoes and walked out. Outside, she waved down a bus heading toward the mountains. As the town shrank behind her and the road twisted upward, she held the bag to her chest and thought only of the small house at the foot of the slope, where her son was living with the girl who had just come back from the edge of death. The bus dropped James's mother at a dusty crossroads where the paved road turned to red dirt. Mountains rose on one side, a few small houses on the other. She stepped down, clutching the cloth bag. The house with a little garden up there, the driver pointed. That's probably his. Thank you, she said, and started up the narrow path. By the time she saw the house, her breath was short. It was small, with a tin roof, whitewashed walls and a few green rows in front. Lettuce, mustard greens, spring onions. Laundry hung on a line, faded shirts swaying. She stood by the gate for a moment. It wasn't much, but it was clean, lived in. The front door opened. James stepped out with a bucket of water. Careful, the ground's still wet, he began, then froze. Mum. He put the bucket down so fast water sloshed over his shoes and hurried toward her. What are you doing here? He asked, caught between joy and worry. Did Dad? No, she cut in. Your father told me not to come. I came anyway. She lifted the bag. I brought some things. James stared, then exhaled. Come in, he said quietly. Watch your step. Inside was even smaller than it looked. A table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed behind a thin curtain. Everything was simple but neat. His jacket hung on a nail. A notebook with numbers lay on the table. Diep sat propped against the wall, one leg stretched out, a blanket over her lap. Her face was pale, a faint bruise near her temple. When she saw James come in with someone behind him, her fingers tightened on the blanket. James's mother stepped around the curtain. Their eyes met. Hello, Auntie, Diep said softly. She didn't dare say, Mom. She tried to sit up straighter, but her body refused. Don't move, James's mother said at once. She set the bag down and came closer. Up close, Diep looked even thinner than in the photo. If you try to stand and fall again, I'll be the one fainting. Diep blinked. This was not the cold, distant woman she remembered. I'm sorry, Diep blurted. I didn't know you were coming. The house is... I didn't clean properly. Where is it dirty? The older woman asked, glancing around. I've seen worse. It's cleaner than James's room used to be. James coughed. Mum. She ignored him and opened the bag. I brought milk, soft bread, vitamins, she told Diep. The doctor gave you medicine, but these might help. And this. She pulled out a wool scarf. It's cold at night, right? Diep stared at the scarf. You brought all this? For me? For you, she nodded, then added. And for my son, if he remembers to eat anything besides noodles. That line made both of them smile. They talked for a while about simple things. The cold nights, what the doctor had said, how James was doing chores and work at the same time. James's mother listened more than she spoke. She watched how naturally James adjusted the pillow behind Diep, how Diep tried to hide every flash of pain. When James went outside to hang laundry, the room fell quiet. Diep hesitated, then whispered, Auntie, I know I caused trouble for your family. Now James has to spend money because of me, live here in this small house. If you're angry with me, I understand. James's mother looked at her. I won't lie, she said. There was a time I blamed you. I thought if you were gone, James would come home and take an easier road. She sighed. But he didn't. Even when everything fell apart, his heart stayed here. She glanced toward the door. When he sent that photo, I realised something. You're not just the problem. You're also the one suffering with him. Tears pricked Diep's eyes. If I leave, she said quietly, maybe he won't suffer anymore. If he doesn't want you to leave, James's mother asked, you think you know better than he does what makes him happy? Diep bit her lip. She had no answer. Later that afternoon, James walked his mother around the yard. They stood near the vegetable rows, damp soil dark under their feet. This is really where you live now? She asked, looking at the crooked roof. For now, he said. It's small, but it works. It's not what I imagined, she admitted. It's still my choice, James replied. Dad has his idea of success. I just don't agree. He's furious, she said. I guessed, James replied. He told you not to come. He did. She gave a small smile. But I can still choose where I go. They stood in silence for a moment. I'm still angry you left like that, she said. And your father won't soften soon. I can't promise to agree with everything. But after today, she paused. I know you're not just being childish. You're trying to build a life, even if it's hard. James swallowed. That's all I want, he said. And remember, she added quietly, you almost lost that girl. She almost lost you. Don't let all that fear mean nothing. He nodded. I won't. When it was time to go, she went back inside to say goodbye to Diep. I can't stay, she said. The bus won't wait. Thank you for coming, Diep said, voice shaky. I never thought you would. Honestly, I didn't think I would either, the older woman replied. She picked up the scarf and wrapped it around Diep's shoulders, careful of the bandage. Next time I visit, I expect to see you standing. Deal? Next time? Diep echoed. If you don't scare me off, the woman said, half joking. Diep laughed through the shine in her eyes. I'll try. James walked his mother down to the road. As she climbed onto the bus, she turned back. Up the path, the little house stood against the slope. In the doorway, Diep leaned on the frame, scarf bright on her shoulders, waving shyly. James's mother lifted her hand in return, then got on. The bus pulled away. Her phone vibrated. Her husband's name flashed on the screen. So, his voice came tight, you went anyway. I did, she said, watching the mountains pass. And? And he's not just being stubborn, she answered. He's choosing the life he wants. There was a pause. She didn't fill it. She just leaned back, fingers on the half-empty bag. Back at the foot of the mountain, James closed the gate and turned toward the house. Diep was still in the doorway, scarf around her shoulders. Their eyes met. For the first time since the accident, it wasn't only fear and exhaustion between them. There was something else. Hope.
Tập 4 kể về hành trình bắt đầu của James và Diep tại công ty nông sản DG buổi sáng. Cả hai cùng dọn dẹp sửa sang lại tiệm xe cũ thành văn phòng đầu tiên, treo bản đồ các bản làng, đặt quyết tâm giúp bà con có giá nông sản tốt hơn. Chuyến đi thu mua đầu tiên, xem chấp nhận trả giá 65 cho một lô ngô, dù giá thị trường chỉ 63 đến 64, để xây dựng niềm tin với nông dân. Hôm sau, Diệp chủ động xin theo James lên bản trên núi thu mua bưởi. James lái xe máy kéo xe bò, Diệp ngồi trên xe cạnh những bao bưởi len lỏi trên con đường đất treo leo bên vực sâu. Đường xuống núi, bánh xe sụp ổ gà, xe lật nghiêng, Diệp trượt ngã xuống vực